Corla. And I speak for Labour today as we face a triple crisis, with the cost of living crisis, an energy security crisis and a housing crisis. Undoubtedly, the cost of living and energy crises have been exacerbated by Russia's brutal war on Ukraine, and we're seeing, I think, just this week, even more evidence of the brutality and horror of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But there's no doubt also that this government has been failing in building up the necessary infrastructure to ensure that the supports would be there to get us through a cost of living and energy crisis as we face into a bleak winter. And there's no doubt also that government have been insufficiently cognisant of the existential climate emergency that we are also facing as we seek to deal with and address hardship for so many families and households through rising costs, spiralling food and energy prices, unaffordable rent and mortgage. I hear every day, Minister, in my own constituency from families and individuals who are struggling to make ends meet. Families and individuals who, until even the last 6 months or a year, their incomes were enough to meet the costs they were facing, but whose incomes are no longer enough to meet those spiralling costs. And in Ireland, we do have surplus budget figures, 6.3 billion budget figures for the 8 months of this year, nearly full employment, a paradox of plenty, because we see the social contract broken. We see delivery riders unable to afford to eat themselves and having to rely on charitable institutions to get hot meals. And that's really unacceptable in Ireland in 2022. The hardship is intolerable. And it's in this context that we're debating this energy security motion. And it is true that the government is failing citizens who are looking to see certainty, who want to know what their bills will be like in 1 month, in 2 months and 3 months as we face into the winter. And that's what's currently lacking. The situation is at breaking point for so many households, told that their energy bills may reach an average, we're told now, of up to €6,000 next year, a threefold increase on heating and electricity, unsustainable for so many. And with this terrible cost of living crisis, undoubtedly households and communities need urgent measures in next week's budget to give immediate relief. And I think some of that is acknowledged in this motion. However, the common ground that I have with the drafters of this motion ends there, unfortunately, because the original motion, as proposed by the Royal Independents, fails to engage sufficiently with the climate emergency. It fails to acknowledge the huge existential crisis we face. And we should not approach any measures seeking to tackle cost of living and energy crises without having really serious regard to how best we can meet our vital climate emission reduction targets. How can we do this? And it can be a win-win. We can seek to reduce emissions through really clever and radical government policy while giving relief to hard-pressed households, but that's absent from the original motion. The global climate and biodiversity crises are existential, so the notion of abandoning carbon budgets is ludicrous. To quote Extinction Rebellion, we must tell the truth about climate and about climate change, and we're seeing its impacts everywhere. In Pakistan with floods, in Europe with droughts, we're seeing this. We have delayed for far too long, and the prospect, the really bleak prospect of blackouts, of freezing homes in Ireland this winter, should refocus our minds and strengthen our commitment to insulate communities from the worst effects of climate change. And many of the technologies and solutions we need do exist, from agriculture to transport. We know what can be done. Yesterday I was delighted to visit the ploughing championships in County Laois and to meet there with members of the farming and food production communities who tell me they want support to give effect to ambitious climate targets. They want to see farming and food production in Ireland rendered sustainable for them, for their children, but also for all of our communities as we face into the climate emergency. And it was wonderful to see the engagement on our Labour stall there at the ploughing championships, and to hear from so many people involved in agri-tech and really exciting new initiatives and exciting new entrepreneurship. And from my own constituency in Ranelagh, Concept Dairy, working on a new, having developed a new app for dairy farmers. Really ambitious and really exciting innovation there, supported by Enterprise Ireland and others. Minister, really exciting to see the sort of work that's being done. So we know that we can do this. We can meet climate targets. We can make Ireland the renewable superpower we can be. But we need a new economic model for that, which generates wealth and prosperity for all, but which also supports emissions reductions and which breaks the hold of the fossil fuel oligarchs and magnates, and indeed the polluting dictators mentioned in this motion. So there is a better way possible than that envisaged in this motion. And I think we need to be clear about that. We in Labour do not believe, for example, that Ireland needs floating LNG terminals. We're open to the development of storage facilities, of course, but only on condition that such facilities can be repurposed for renewables, that can be future-proofed, in other words. And I think, to be fair, government acknowledges that too. But as a cost control measure and as a way of addressing the energy security crisis, we in Labour have also called on government to take temporary ownership of the Corrib gas field, our own indigenous gas supply, which could be provided to the market at cost plus a reasonable margin for the production facility, rather than government having, and indeed households, having to pay exorbitant costs for gas that is produced here in Ireland and the price of which should not be set by international conditions. And I've called for that already in this House. And Minister, I'd be glad if you would take that call back to your colleagues in government. But we believe, however, that what Ireland really needs, longer term and indeed medium term, for energy security is rapid deployment of offshore wind. And indeed, this should have been also a short-term approach. Floating LNG is not a sound long-term strategy for Ireland, because we all know, really, that the future is renewable energy. And if as much political energy went into resolving why offshore wind development has been so delayed, rather than when we need LNG terminals, we would be in a much more secure position. So we believe, as a starting point, we need to ensure that there are emergency measures introduced to alleviate pressure on households while we develop urgently our infrastructure for deriving more energy through renewable sources, and in particular through offshore wind. We have called for the immediate introduction of a windfall tax on excessive profits from energy companies, an immediate price cap on energy bills, and the extension of eligibility for the fuel allowance to ensure that more low and middle income households can be brought in to alleviate hardship in the short term this coming winter. And these represent significant measures to get our communities through this winter. But we also need to see, Minister, vastly enhanced environmental initiatives to incentivise a rapid switch nationwide to renewables, both to help meet our climate targets and greatly reduce household bills. We have called for a climate ticket, unlimited public transport journeys anywhere in Ireland for €9 a month. Even to introduce this on a trial basis would have a real added value of helping out hard-pressed households, but also helping us all to begin making real impact on vital climate targets. And the counter-motion from government, in our view, is unambitious, because it doesn't seek to do anything like as radical as a climate ticket. It doesn't seek, for example, to double the grant which we should be giving households to invest in solar capacity. That would be a win-win for all. Government should be incentivising households hugely through much more ambitious measures to ensure that switch to renewables, that switch to solar for so many homes that many households are already seeking to do, but are hampered, as we know from recent reports, are hampered by the excessive red tape, excessive bureaucracy and low levels of grants available. And indeed the long delays, huge delays on the Warmer Home Scheme, huge delays in getting repayment of grant aid that is available. And we believe that therefore we need to see an Ireland that works for everyone, an Ireland that works for all, brought about through measures, ambitious and more radical measures from government in next week's budget.